Hello, my name is Dr. Theodonas, and I will be your instructor for your CAD for Design course. We will be using the free and open source software called Blender, which is essentially an open source software for any kind of 3D modeling, design, animation, rendering, but also you can use it to create your own games and represent almost anything within the design realm. Blender has a very long history of supporting creatives all over the world. It is developed by the Blender Foundation in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. And as I said before, it is open source, which means that you have access to the source code that builds the software and enables you actually to participate in its development and change it should you wish to do so. This first video, we will actually go through the operations of installing Blender and then navigating to its first interface and getting to grips essentially with some basic features. If you open a browser on your computer and you navigate to blender.org, you will arrive to this screen and essentially you will see the Blender website with some operations in terms of development and also the Blender Studio, which is the actual design and animation studio run by the Blender Foundation. And you can see also some information about free and open source in the context of Blender. You can go ahead and go to download, and I'm running this on an Apple computer, so immediately the website recognizes this, and we can see that it allows me to download it. If you need to download it on a Windows or a Linux machine, you can click here and you will get any other kind of option, essentially connecting with your own setup. If you have an older Mac with an Intel processor, then you need to use this. If you have a newer Windows machine with an ARM processor, which is very rare at the moment, you can use this installer or the portable versions. The portable versions actually allow you to run the software without installing. If you need to run the software on a Mac OS 6 machine without installing, you can just use the Apple Silicon and then just unzip the DMG packets that downloads. I will just click here and showcase what happens. So I get the download. You get a screen that says that you can donate to Blender. You don't have to pay anything to use it, but any kind of donation essentially will be highly appreciated by the Blender community. And as soon as my software downloads, I can go to my downloads and of course try to install it. You double click and you drag it into applications. I won't do that right now because I've done it in the past. And you'll see that I can go to my applications and I have 3 Blenders because I have many versions. The latest one I'm running is Blender 4.32. Let me go and close this, making sure that I have everything. So click on there, and I get a brand new screen of Blender. And essentially through here, you will see now how things work. Before I continue, I need to activate actually my screencast. So as you're looking at the screen, take a look at the lower left hand corner where you will see a mouse appearing. And also any kind of press I do will appear there. Now, if you're running this on a Windows machine, anything that goes with command means this is the control key for you. And anything that is an option means that it's alt. All other keystrokes are the same. So shift is the same, control is the same, and so on and so forth. And if you are trying to see exactly what I did, you will see essentially, take a look at the lower left-hand side corner, scrub to the video a little bit earlier, and you'll see exactly the commands I might have hit on this. Now, to make sure we are navigating the full idea here, is I'm going to introduce the interface of Blender. Blender uses the concept of non-overlapping windows. So you'll see essentially a 3D screen on the main port here. You will see what is called an outliner. So this is a tree that allows you to see all of the objects in the scene. And you will also see what is called properties, right? So anything I have selected here, for example, the camera, I can see its properties here. So you see camera, this object is a camera, and some of its properties, including location and so on and so forth. If I select with the left mouse button the central cube, I try to also navigate by pressing on the middle mouse button. So I'm continuously pressing and rotating. You will see also that the context has changed, and I can get the cube and all of its basic data over here. And you'll see also that the tabs on the properties actually change, right? So you will see essentially that when I click on camera, I jump on a camera version. And when I click on the cube, I jump also on a particular mess that explains to me what's going on. The other first parts here describe the render engine. So this is now Eve. The format of the scene, view layers, which we'll see later, scene, right? So scene is everything that is contained within your file, and everything that is contained within your normal scene at the moment. The world, right? So what kind of environment I'm operating in. And then these are all context sensitive, right? So the first one is a collection of objects. This is an object tab, modifiers, particles, physics, constraints, if we're designing something that needs to be handled a little bit differently. The data that is contained within an object. So important distinction between object and data. We'll see that also later on. And as well, the materials, right? So where we can actually see what kind of material every part of the cube is handling at the moment. We got a little bit of a delay there. So, and on the lower part, you will see essentially a timeline. So this is an animation timeline. If I press play, you will see that I get a marker of the animation changing frames. Not much is happening at the moment if I scrub through the animation, but essentially this is a control of time that we will use to understand what is going on when we're changing and animating things. And you'll also see on the main screen now, so we'll go into the navigation of the main scene. So this is our 3D view. Everything that happens here is in 3D. You will see a green axis, this green line, and this red line. So this red line is the x-axis, and you'll notice also here that we get an indicator. The green axis is the Y, and the Z is the vertical view, which we don't see at the moment, but we can understand where we are by understanding the grid around us. We already saw the camera and the object if I click on it, but there's also another object here which is called the light. And we'll see this probably on our third or fourth course. I will try to explain also what is going on with many of these changing kind of ideas. But first, before we go into further into the 3D view, I will try to change windows. So you'll see that every window has an indicator here that we can change its type, right? So I can go and do image editing. I can, for example, create a new image. And I'll create a 1024 by 1024 image with transparent color. I can name it. So you get a essentially a context sensitive menu here that changes according to the type. And within that, I could try essentially to change and paint essentially, right? So if I go here, I can create a new mask, a new fill, and through this menu essentially start painting. It doesn't matter at the moment. What we want to do is understand that every window can be changed into any other kind of type. So for example, by clicking on here, I expanded the outliner, and I can also take it back to this kind of side, and I can create essentially a new subdivision. So when I click on the edge, you will see my cursor change to this cross. And if I click and drag on the edge and towards the other window, I am able to expand and change windows. So go ahead and try to essentially create this kind of subdivisions. Play a little bit more with your windows, and try to manipulate them so you arrive at a good result. And as I was trying to say, you can also change their types. So from having an outline here, I can also create a 3D view. And you'll see again, I get another 3D view here. And this is useful because I could set up essentially one view here that is looking at it from the side, and a much more perspective view here that allows me to see my object in an overview. But for now, I'll go ahead and change it back to an outliner. Understanding now also the 3D view, I want you to really go here to the menu, and you'll see we have 4 menus: View, Select, Add, and Object. And the view actually changes the way we, what essentially we see through the 3D view. So you will go perspective, orthographic. Perspective simulates the way we see things from our own 2 eyes, whereas orthographic actually places us in a world where there is no perspective reduction. So all lines are parallel to each other, and the viewer is kind of set to infinity. Now, perspective orthographic actually is really useful because you can set up essentially a lot of things that help you with your measurements and understanding scale. And I'll go ahead also, because I'm doing this on a laptop, I don't have a full numeric keypad. And if you are on a laptop as well, it is very useful to go here and go and say emulate numpad. And this will allow the top row of your keyboard where you have numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, to emulate the numpad on a larger keyboard, which is normally on your right-hand side. And what we can do with this is we can actually navigate through the front, and you'll see here it says front orthographic. The 2 actually rotates things around the y-axis. 1 and 3 are right and front. So this is front, this is right. Obviously, we don't see any changes in the cube because cube is the same no matter from what side you look at it. And 4 rotates around the z-axis. 6 rotates around the other z-axis, the other side of the z-axis. And 5 actually toggles user perspective. So press 5 and get it to user perspective. And that's how you're going to start looking at it essentially with front orthographic, 3 right orthographic. Maybe if I press 5 and go into perspective, by pressing 7, I look things from above. So this is very useful for navigation while you are in a scene and you see where everything is. Another thing that is very useful for navigation is to make sure that you see essentially things from a particular viewpoint. And you'll see when I go to view, and cameras, I can actually look at what the camera is looking at. And if I click on this left click once on this camera, I can select the camera from its camera view. If I go and say viewpoint, show me the top, I exit with a really nice animation outside the camera. And if I go on navigation, I can also see here, orbit left, orbit right, all of the numpad commands I can use, right? And you see here also there are a couple of more for zooming in and out into this viewport, and so on and so forth, right? And I can also fly. So it didn't work out right now. Let me try it again. Never mind. I'll just go back to view. And I can also align view to active. We'll explain what active means. This is the active object, which at this point, it's the selected object I have here, the cube. So if I go align view to active, from the top, it will center on the cube and aligns it to that object. If I make the light an active object or the camera, and I go align view to active from the front, I get essentially, from the bottom, I get essentially an alignment of the view to the camera. But also I can manipulate the camera view to particular ideas here. I won't go into view regions yet. This has to do also with how far or how close we are to a particular object. But another way to manipulate the view is not only from this toolbar here. I can also, if I have view toolbar, I see it essentially activated on the left. I have the toolbar activated here. But I'll also manipulate view from this menu on the right-hand side, right? So view, I get a focal length, right? So this is what kind of lens my view, what kind of camera lens my view is manipulating. And you'll see when I try to look here at the view regions that I have a clipping region on and a clear render region. I have a clipping start and a clipping end, and this is essentially what my view, kind of like the invisible camera of the view is actually looking at, right? So it starts 1 centimeter away from the observer and ends 1,000 meters away, right? So if I really zoom out, you will start seeing that, part of the field of view is lost, and I no longer see the object essentially. And if I want to make sure that I see everything, I can really increase this by clicking and dragging, or clicking inside and entering a large number like 5,000. But I can also lock the view to particular objects. If I click here, my 3 objects that I have available, which is the 3 you see also on the outliner, are camera, cube, and light. So I could lock camera to the view, and whatever I do, and try to zoom in, zoom out, or try to go ahead, is always locked onto the cube, or completely lose it and just be able to freely manipulate this. I close this for now, and I'll go back to item. Now, we discussed a little bit on what is an active object. So essentially what is an active object is the one you have, the one that is last selected. And what do I mean by this? You might have essentially first select the light, then shift left click, and you select essentially the camera, and this last selected object is the active object. So even though I selected the light before, my active object is now the camera. And if I shift left click on the cube, you see that the light and the camera become a little less orange, and my more active orange is on the tube. And of course here, that's the last active object. So when we're discussing about active objects, keep in mind that you need to create the active object as the last selected object. Another unique feature of Blender is the idea of the 3D cursor. So yes, you have your mouse cursor essentially, but this actually operates in 2D, whereas the 3D cursor is this kind of navigation that you see in the center of the cube, and you can also find it with this button here on the toolbar. So if I change my context about what my mouse is doing, so from selection, that you can see, click here, and I can select. So for example, like this, I can select by using a circle, and also the camera, or just tweak. So I immediately is about picking. But also, if I want to move the cursor, which you now see as the center of the object, is that you have the cursor. I can click here and then move it to anywhere else on the screen. You see it also moves in 3 dimensions. So now I am, let's go on the front. You'll see now that it's actually some units above the cube. Let's try to go with the idea that I'm trying to place it exactly on, 5 grid units above the cube. And actually now with the front, right, you also see the blue line, so that's the Z-axis that we mentioned earlier, yeah? And if I want to manipulate the cursor exactly, I will press Shift S, and I will get this really nice menu that allows me to use the cursor to manipulate objects, right? So I can say now I want the cursor to go to grid, right? So, and the keyboard also is 4, right? So cursor to grid, and you see that my cursor snaps, so clicks essentially, jumps onto the nearest grid line. It's maybe easier to zoom out. And if I want to zoom in and really fine tune where the cursor goes, I can then go Shift S, cursor to grid, and you'll see that it jumps directly here. Let's say now that I want to return the cursor actually to the object that I had it on. So the cube, I will select, I try to select the cube, but what happens is I select the cursor. So I'm going to change my focus of my mouse again and go to selection. Click on this object, and you'll see that a dot appears at the center of the object. That's the object center, which you will also see. It's actually the origin, right? So set origin, you can manipulate it through object, set origin. And here I will Shift S and go cursor to selected. And this means that I go to the basic origin and orbit essentially of this object. Okay, so this is about basic navigation. Let's take a look at simple ideas of transform pivots and how do we move things about, right? And this is also connected to the cursor. So one way to move things about is to go here and press this button here that goes move. And immediately I see a gimbal appearing on the center of the active object with 3 axes, so Z, Y, and red for the x-axis. That's one way to do transformations, right? So moving objects about. But another way to do it is you can press on the white circle you see here, and then I freely move the object about. And as I'm freely moving it about, I can also lock in particular directions by pressing on the letters of the respective axis. So if I want to constrain it in terms of the x-axis, I will press X. Y, or Z. And let's say I want to move 5 units on the Z axis. I will press on the Y, then the Z, then 5. And you will see also on the upper left-hand side that I get a distance of 5 meters along global Z. I release my mouse and I have a move. Now, we don't need to do this with just the, changing essentially to this button. I can also press the keyboard G for grab. Counterintuitively, Blender doesn't use the letter M. The letter M is used for mirroring, so reflecting geometry or a transformation. So I'm now moving the cube freely. Let's say I want to move it back to Z and -5. So I'm going in the opposite direction. And you see now the object is locked. No matter how I move it, right, I get again -5 for the distance. And press enter on my keyboard and I have done the move. Rotation and scaling. So rotating and moving things about works in the same kind of manner. I can rotate things around the x-axis, y-axis, and z-axis by clicking there. Or I can press the letter R and I get a freely rotate around the center origin. And if I then constrain it on the z-axis, I can rotate around the global z-axis, so which is what you see over there. I press again R to go into trackball, so that's kind of mapping my 2D movements on a 3D rotation. Or I can go back to escape to cancel, and I can go back to rotating y-axis like this. So R and a second R gives me a trackball, which is a little bit more playful, and so on and so forth. And let me also try another scale as well. So you'll see that in scaling, I can scale along the y-axis, scale uniformly, and scale again along the x-axis. And obviously these are compounded, right? So if I scale on the y-axis a lot, this kind of gets compounded with any other scale I did. Okay, did some transformation, so move, rotate, and scale. And by the way, to activate scale, again, same thing. S is the keyboard, Z, X, and Y to constrain it along the global axis. Now, let's see how we could actually, right now, I can only rotate things or scale things along the global axis, as you saw, right? But what also happens is I have the object here, which is transformed essentially, and it defines a new set of coordinates, right? So I could actually say part of the cube essentially is transformed. I should actually scale it along its longer axis. How could we try to do that? And we could try to do that by scaling. And if I go Z, it constrains it on that axis. If I press again, it scales it along its local coordinates. So it switches again and goes back to the space that is kind of defined by the object. So R, Z, and press again, and you'll see that it rotates around its local kind of coordinate space. Grab, local Z, right? So I move it along its directions. And this is very useful. We'll see how we can also use this to define new coordinate spaces later on. So from that point of view, you can essentially manipulate any object to do exactly what you want. Let's try very nicely now to return it to where it was before. So I'm going to rotate like this. I'm going to go on to the right orthographic and try to place it as such. Let's go back to front. I probably need to go back here and rotate again. Almost. You see now it becomes very difficult actually to be very accurate, right? Because I was not keeping track of what I was doing. But I might be there a little bit. So scale, I'm going to try and go to about 2. One, and scale on the x-axis. And then try and place it at the beginning. I missed it here. So scale, grab, and then place it again. But again, it's not actually very accurate, right? So you'll see that my cube is different in terms of what I had before. Let me go and undo all of these transformations, and I'll show you an easier way to do it. So I get back to the rotated cube. And what I can do is I can go object, and I can ask Blender, because I haven't applied the transformations. These are still essentially, they're not baked into the object. I can clear all of the transformations. So if I clear the location, it jumps back to the origin. If I clear the rotation, it eliminates all rotations. And if I clear the scale, I get my original object back. So let's see the difference if I try to bake them, right? So I'll also try to create a new object here. So one of the ways to do it is if I go to Object, Duplicate Objects, and you'll see that the shortcut here is Shift D. And you also get another one which is Duplicate Linked. We'll see a little bit later what that means, but initially let's go with Shift D. And I created a new object that is different, and you'll see immediately that this object is named cube.001, right? Let me move it a little bit more. And here I will go apply all transforms. So immediately now all of these transforms are baked into the object, and if I go and try to clear anything, scale, location, origin, nothing happens because my transforms have become now the default for that object. Whereas in the copy where I haven't applied it, if I clear location, it jumps back to the center of the axis. If I clear rotation, it clears all rotation, and clear scale, and I get essentially the original cube. Go ahead and try this while we're getting ready for our next application, essentially, which is how we create actually, no, we won't go into creating new objects first, since we're still talking about transformations. We'll talk a little bit more about the global and local and the pivot points here. So what do these menus do? This is essentially setting up a particular transform orientation, right? So where do your orientations work? We saw essentially that every object has a local one. And normal is essentially the face of one object. And to activate that, let's try first to go onto the local. So if I change to local immediately, when I click on this object and I grab and I go X, you see it takes essentially the local axis. But because I have the transformations applied, it refers back to the normal coordinates. I can also, so let's try to delete this and create a new one. And I do this with Shift D and grab towards the top, rotate a bit freely with my trackball, scale on the Z, minimize on the Y, and scale on the X-axis as well. So I get a nice object like that. So if I go now on to scale with the Z, immediately it activates the local, right? So I don't have to go grab Z and Z again. So the first press of the axis actually activates the first the transform orientation that is applied here. Here's now the other point, right? Right now, the transform pivot point, the pivot point around which orientations happen, is the median point of the selection. And for most objects, this is the origin. But if I have two objects like this, you see that the median point jumps between them, right? If I try to rotate, I get a rotation that is centered around the distance of the two objects. But I could actually center everything around the 3D cursor. So I can click here and say, here's the 3D cursor. I want you to do everything around the cursor. Sorry, I didn't select the two objects. So this one and this one. And I can also get, of course, a bounding box center, right? So a very essentially it creates a bounding box around all objects and then finds its center rather than its center of gravity. I can also go individual origins. So if I'm rotating now, everything will rotate around its individual origins. So you will see here I rotate around those kind of ideas. And most of the times we will use median point because we'll be rotating one object or one part of the mess. And then I can have also active element. And this means that everything rotates around the most active object. So if I want to have first this cube, then shift, left click this cube, I click and I take it essentially around this. So leave it for now for medium point, and then when we need to do other much more accurate ideas, we can play with this. And the second thing here is the third menu is the snapping point. And if I click it, you see that I get a magnet. And this magnet allows me essentially to move things across certain ideas and be more accurate. And right now, this is set to an increment, which I can set. The rotation increment you see here. But if I go with the grid, everything happens with clicking along the grid. Much more easy is to go with vertex, edge, and face. So vertex is actually some of the points that we have. You see now that this clicks on the vertices of the cube, which is very useful because I can click and snap on objects much more easy. And this brings us to the idea that we can actually now introduce what is a vertex, edge, and face, actually. There are also some others, but we won't use them at this point. So the first thing I need to do is deactivate this, make sure I am back to global initially, and then also median point, so I'm ready. And you'll see that, I have a cube, but it's only a cube because it has 6 sides that are equal, right? So how do I manipulate this? And I can manipulate this by clicking here and going into edit mode. And this allows me to jump immediately. You see here that I jump onto the data essentially of what is contained there. So if I click on cube 001, you get another mesh of cube 001, and this also has a material kind of embedded. This is the structure of the material of the object. If I press double A, very fast, I deselect everything. And if I need to select, let's say, the top 4 vertices, so these are the points, the nodes that you see on the 4 corners, I can kind of click on them. To keep on selecting one by one, I shift and left click. So I add to the selection, and you see again, the last selected vertex is the active object. And I also get a menu here in the edit mode where I am playing around with vertices, vertex select, add select. So I change now to edges. Or faces, which means when I'm clicking, I'm selecting whole faces. So when we are clicking on snapping and we get this vertex, edge, and face, this is the context essentially what we mean, right? So this is the all geometry in meshes within Blender is represented with vertex, an edge like this, and a face. And you need essentially at least 3 vertices to create a face connected again by objects. So through looking at vertices, edges, and faces, we have already started to understand how we can represent objects, right? And one of the ways we do it in Blender is by having this kind of mesh object. And I'll change back to object mode. And one of the ways to do it is by clicking onto this menu here on the top left corner, going onto object mode. Whereas if I want to be faster, I can just press my tab button on your keyboard, and you see that I'm switching context between the two. Now, what happens in object mode, like every transformation or anything I do applies directly to that object. Whereas in edit mode, I'm actually changing the geometry, right? So if I press twice the A button, and let's say I want to select the 4 top edge vertices, I can do that by clicking here, shift left click. Or another way to do it is by pressing the border select by pressing B, and by dragging with my left mouse button, and I create a window. Or again, another way to do it is by pressing C, and I get a circle which I can increase or decrease with my middle mouse button, my wheel. And from that point of view, I can get essentially a good selection and right click to exit selection. And now I'm manipulating essentially that part of the cube. So let's grab. So I'm moving the top part. I want to move it only on the Z axis. So Z to go high. And I'll press 2, and that's 2 meters along the global Z axis. And then I'm now going to press tab again, and I'm actually out of the edit mode and I'm back into object mode. So I turned the cube from a cube into essentially a very simple oblong kind of base. Now, looking at what kind of other objects we can create with our Blender, I need to introduce the add menu, and you'll see here this. So first of all, let's go and activate the toolbar again, so we can see it here. And you'll see that I have many ways to actually add particular objects, right? So I can click here and I can go add cube, cone, cylinder, UV sphere, icosphere. And I get a nice parametric grid, essentially, that snaps to particular objects. And I can click and drag, and then also I now get an icosphere. Let's do the same now with a cube. So I add a cube, I snap here, and I get a snap to the vertices because I have vertices here activated. And I click, and I get a nice cube. And from that point of view, I can continue essentially creating let's say, an abstract sculptural mode. I wasn't too successful. In 3 dimensions. Let's try also not allow this to, so click and drag, it snaps, and then freely drag, and I'm able to create this. Now, all of these objects are essentially meshes. They're not solid. They are completely empty on the inside. And you'll see now when I click on this button here, I get a depth of what kind of surface I want, the orientation, and snap to geometry, essentially, right? So this is very interactive, but I also have other ways to create this. So deactivate that and click on tweak. And I'll move the cursor a little bit here so you can see what I'm going to do. And one way to add objects, as I said, is through this menu here or through the add menu here. So mesh, I get plane, I can get a cube, shift and middle mouse button to move. I can get a circle, which is completely empty, as you see, it doesn't have any kind of filling. And then I can do a UV sphere, and in the same place I'll go circle, I'm moving it about. Icosphere, which we saw, cylinder, cone, and also torus, kind of like a really nice geometric donut, right? So this is an interesting point because if I click here, I go inside, you will see essentially that the donut, this torus, is made out of very flat faces, right? So it's not really completely curvy. We'll see ways in our next course on how to make this completely curvy. And I can also get a grid, which is a subdivided plate, as you see here. Or I can get the mascot of Blender, which is called Suzanne. It's actually a monkey. So Shift B to zoom in terms of the view. And I get Suzanne here, which if I click on, you'll see it's essentially a very polygon shaped, low polygon shaped head of a monkey. The add menu here can also be activated by clicking on Shift Add, and I can get various other ideas and objects. So I can do curves, and there are many curves here. So Bezier curves, actually, let me delete this by pressing on X. So add curve, oh, no, sorry, get the cursor there, add Bezier curve, and then when I hit on tab to go into edit mode, I can click on the defining vertices of the handles of the curve, and you'll see that any other kind of manipulation applies, right? So rotation around the z-axis, and if I need to extend it, I can click on the handle and then press E for extrude, and you see how I'm able actually to create a 3-dimensional curve. Hit tab, you see this really nice, beautiful freeform curve. If I press curve and then circle, what is the difference between this circle and that mesh-like circle? This one you will see is made out of particular points. So if I click on this and I move it, you'll see that that circle is essentially made out of points and lines, whereas this circle is actually a genuine curve. So if I move this about, you'll see that the curvature actually remains, right? So it's not a line and point simulating a circle. And obviously it works actually in 3 dimensions as well. Okay, I think now we are at a level where you can navigate Blender, you can create new objects, and you can play with a little bit with their geometry. Try to play around with all of your navigation. Try to activate front, right, top, with the 5, activate orthographic or perspective. Use the cursor to jump about in 3D space. Create new objects and try to manipulate and transform their size, rotation, and scale. And in many cases, try to record what you find easy or difficult. What success looks like is, for this week, is to being able to explain to a friend what Blender is, to be able to install it on your machine, customize the interface and viewports, create basic objects, navigate, move, rotate, and scale objects, and edit them on a basic level. So enter edit mode, play a bit with their either handles or vertices, edges, and faces. You won't be able to do a lot, but at least that is what success looks like. And please record in your notes what was frictionless in your experience, what was easy, and what was a lot less easy, what was challenging. Is there any knowledge that you feel you're missing, right? What exactly is the challenge connected to in terms of knowledge? And how would you plan to go about and acquire that knowledge that is missing and that skill? And that might mean that you might schedule a question for me or schedule any kind of other idea of how we proceed. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to seeing you in one of our next classes soon. Bye-bye for now.